And the reason why this is instated is in an instance where we may have upwards of an 18-inch valve here that's going to be quite large. If the scaling is set so that that doesn't display too large, most likely if we were to display an unscaled version of the valve here in a 4-inch or a 1-inch, it's going to be so small that when you plot it out on a viewport, it's just going to look like a blob. So basically, when we change the plot length, that allows us to have a symbol that's readable on the drawing. And this is illustrated if we turn off the threshold here in our pipe system definition. We're going to completely turn off graphical display, and you'll see that this symbol became even smaller, so small that most likely it's going to plot out as just a blob. So that's the reason why that graphical threshold is in place. So if we go ahead and reinstate the threshold here, and we set it to 4 inches so that we have two examples of the graphical, we can go into our display manager and see that now in the plan representation, which is what we're using right now to display pipe, has been broken down into a number of different display components. These are new to this release. You won't recognize them if you're used to previous releases. You'll see that we've broken down into graphical as well as just standard connector and center line, one line here. So this is actually going to control the appearance of the center line when viewing in simple one line. The center line is going to be the center line that's used in a two-line representation, and this is going to be the center line that's used for graphical. So if I wanted to go ahead and override this, and let's just set it to green for graphical, let's set it to red for one line, and let's set our contour, which is the actual outside of the pipe, to, let's set it to blue for illustration purposes, and we hit OK. You'll see that the colors did change, and you can see that even though these are the same systems, we're seeing different display of the main line here, and that's because they're actually different components. Of course, the fittings themselves did not change colors because they're a separate object type, and we would have needed to have changed the settings for that object type, the pipe fitting object type, for those color changes to correspond. But this is a good way to illustrate how those different components have different impacts. And the one other item to point out here is that by default, these fittings within a one line will have a connector display, whereas they will not have a connector display on the graphical, and that's illustrated here within the display manager. If we were to go to our pipe fittings and look at plan, you'll see that the graphical connector has been turned off. If we were to go ahead and turn it back on, you'll see that we now have connectors on our graphicals. But in general, since these hatches can be so small and they do not scale accordingly like the MB parts, you may run into issues where you get blobs as well on the connectors themselves. So by default, those symbols for the connector are turned off as such right here.